The Seahawks are 3-0 for just the 8th time in franchise history, but amid a victory against the Dolphins, some key injuries on the defensive line. How did the Seahawks manage without Leonard Williams and Byron Murphy? We're going to be breaking it all down here on our Monday edition of Locked On Seahawks.
You are Locked On Seahawks, your daily Seattle Seahawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Greetings, 12. This is Corbin Smith, host of the Locked On Seahawks podcast, your daily Seahawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Glad to be joined, as always, by my co-host in crime, Rob Rang. And a special thanks to all the 12s who are listening in, whether you're in Bend, Oregon, or down in Fort Worth, Texas. We greatly appreciate each and every one of you for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. The Seahawks are 3-0 for the first time since 2020 and just the 8th time in franchise history. But the victory over the Dolphins may have come at a cost. Leonard Williams, Byron Murphy suffering injuries, not playing in the entire second half. We'll have the latest on that and the depth muscles that were flexed on the defensive line against Miami. We've got our Monday Musings and, of course, our Monday Mailbag, a jam-packed episode brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. Place your first $5 bet and you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Now for your lead story here on our Monday edition of Locked On Seahawks. The Seahawks are 3-0, but it came at a cost on Monday. Leonard Williams and Byron Murphy II both exiting the game before halftime with injuries. Specifically, Williams has a rib injury, a hamstring issue for Murphy. Neither one of them were given updates today by Mike Macdonald, other than just telling us what the injuries were. Again, we don't know the severity, but rather than spend this entire segment dwelling on those injuries, we're going to have time to do that. But the Seattle Seahawks defensive line, we talked last week about just how much better the depth in this football team is. I think you got to see on the defensive line in particular just how good the depth is for this team with the way that they were able to bottle up Miami's run game, particularly in the second half when they didn't have number 99 or number 91 on the field, Rob.
Yeah, that's a big reason why I think that the Seahawks were very wise in making sure that they got Johnathan Hankins signed in the first place. Of course, Jay Reed is a player that, I've been very, very high on for an awful long time, dating back to his days at Alabama. And, of course, when Seattle made him a second-round selection all those years ago. And we saw Draymond Jones come up with a big-time performance as well. His 5 tackles, the sack, the forced fumble, was absolutely terrific. One of his strongest performances since he has joined the Seahawks. So, as you said, Corbin, there's going to be an awful lot of angst out there for Seahawks fans who are concerned about the fact that they lost, 2 very good football players in Leonard Williams and in Draymond Jones. And I apologize for anybody listening for the background noises there. But that's basically what it had to feel like for Skylar Thompson as well. When he saw all of these Seahawks defensive linemen being able to wreak havoc against an offensive line of the Miami Dolphins that up until this point, Corbin, have been pretty darn successful.
Yeah, there's no question about it. That front line, they were able to put so much pressure on Skylar Thompson. They turned him into a battering ram to the point that he actually got knocked out of this football game. And the interior guys, your Johnathan Hankins, your Draymond Jones of the world, they weren't the ones that were tallying a bunch of the sacks. Jaron Reed did have one late. That play was hilarious because Mike Macdonald initially was going to accept the penalty, which would wipe out the sack. And you could see down in the field, Jaron Reed was looking over and I'm like, what, coach? You're taking my sack away? And then Macdonald ended up telling the officials, wait, no, we want to decline. So Jaron Reed ended up getting his first sack of the season. But Draymond Jones had a sack, had a forced fumble. He played a lot more snaps inside out of necessity in this game. The inside guys, the one that I want to talk about particularly, Johnathan Hankins. Look, you look at the stat line, 3 tackles, a tackle for loss. For a nose tackle, that's a decent day of the office. You turned on the all-22, though, and you watch what he was doing to the Miami Dolphins front line, especially in the second half yesterday. Every time that they tried to run the ball between the tackles, it felt like he was knocking double teams back into the backfield and was blowing up plays. They could not move him off the line of scrimmage, and this was such a big issue for this defense last year. They did not have that anchor in the middle that could handle those double teams eat up space. And he's making plays on top of it, which is what he's done throughout his career. He had 3 sacks for the Dallas Cowboys a year ago. I think Dallas is missing him a ton. If you've watched the Dallas Cowboys defense, if you want to call it a defense here, these first 3 weeks, they have been missing big number 97. He has been a great addition for the Seahawks. He played over 50% of the snaps. Again, a lot of this out of necessity and handled it just fine. And they list him at 330. I mean, this is a big, big dude, and he's really difficult to move. That has been a huge addition, figuratively and literally, for this Seahawks defense. But I think you just got to see Mike Morris out there as well, playing some snaps. Travis Gibson played a few snaps where he was inside, which he's done that earlier in his career. That's something that he offers that a lot of the other edge guys can't do. We got to see the depth really flex. And, oh, by the way, Miles Adams was not dressing for this game. So Miles Adams could have certainly helped them, but he was a healthy scratch. I would assume if either Murphy or Williams is not available against the Lions on Monday night next week, you are absolutely going to see Miles Adams dressing for this football game. But that is the depth that this team clearly did not have. And they've just got so many different styles. They can mix and match guys. And they were still doing that without Williams and Murphy in this game. And obviously they can't afford to go long-term without those two. But it really was eye-opening just how good this group continued to play. And again, I know Miami did not have the passing game threat that they normally would have, and that made things easier. But still, line of scrimmage play is line of scrimmage play. And I thought that these defensive linemen in the second half, with those injuries, they all stepped up. Jared Reed played 80% of the snaps, and he was still getting a sack at the end of the game, looked really good. This is a fantastic group in terms of depth, as long as they can get both those key pieces back in short order. If they're without Williams or Murphy for a while, the Seahawks may have to start looking on the free agent wire and see if there's anybody they can bring in to try to supplement this group. But it is certainly a much deeper defensive line than they have had really since Michael Bennett and Cliff Averill were still here.
Yeah, I think that's an apt reference there, because that's really what it feels like, is that Seattle has the depth that matches what we saw in the Seahawks Super Bowl runs, where it wasn't one superstar that carried the squad the way that a lot of NFL teams have. And I think that you are correct in pointing out how the Dallas Cowboys have been missing Johnathan Hankins. I think that it was very obvious how much the Miami Dolphins missed their center, Connor Williams, with all the interior pressure that was created. Also, the fact that you mentioned Miles Adams, that being a healthy scratch, of course, that's the danger of having the limited rosters that are available to you on game day. But yes, I would agree that if the injuries to Leonard Williams or Byron Murphy II are any type of long-term situations, then there's no question that Miles Adams is going to be part of that rotation. And he brings a different skill set than any of the rest as well. That, to me, is one of the most exciting things about this. Corbin, that I've often used the Baskin-Robbins pick your own flavor type of analogy. And we've done that so many times at wide receiver and a cornerback. What a incredible value, what an incredible valuable asset it is when you can use that same analogy along the defensive line, because there's just very few quality offensive lines out there. Look, there's no question about it. The 12s, as Mike McDonald acknowledged in his post-game press conference, that had a huge factor. Obviously, the fact that you're talking about a backup and then a third-string quarterback, that has an impact. But also just the beef that Seattle has inside, and the fact that it's not just a bunch of big run stuffers like a Johnathan Hankins or a Jay Reed. You also have some guys who are legitimately slippery that can play inside as well. So again, depending on the type of offense that you're facing, the Seahawks seem very, very well prepared to be able to stop all offenses at the NFL, at least, of course, the first 3 that they faced so far.
We'll have to wait and see until later in the week. The Seahawks, since they're playing on Monday night next week, will not have to release their first injury report until Thursday. So it's going to be a while till we have a beat on what's going to be happening with Byron Murphy II and Leonard Williams. So we'll just have to wait and see a few days, and we'll see what kind of updates we get, where they're going to be at in terms of practice participation. Those will all be signs. The good news, the Seahawks do have that extra day with a Monday night game. That could be the difference between having one or both these guys potentially available in week 4. In the toughest game they've had to this point was the Detroit Lions on the road in prime time. Coming up next, we're going to tackle your questions. It's our Monday Mailbag segment. Don't go away. You're listening to the Locked On Seahawks podcast. This episode is brought your way by our friends at FanDuel. Hey, NFL fans, you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So when you get a hunch in the middle of a game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same where you place your bets. So you have all the stats on DK Metcalf, Jackson Smith and Jigba, Zach Charbonnet, real time, and that can help educate you on your bets, and you can make those bets in the middle of the game. It's an exciting time at FanDuel. You'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Visit FanDuel.com to look at odds to include here on our show. You're listening to the Locked On Seahawks podcast. This is your host, Corbin Smith. Glad to be joined, as always, by my co-host in crime, Rob Rang, and a special thanks to all the 12s who are listening in. We greatly appreciate each and every one of you for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. Let's get to our Monday mailbag segment, Rob. We've got plenty of questions from our valued 12s, and our first one here coming off of X that is coming our way from Jax Boyd, and this one was specifically for you, Mr. Rang. How has Byron Murphy II performed so far, in your opinion, before the injury, obviously? What have you seen in these first 3 games from Byron Murphy II?
Just pure explosiveness. The disruptive ability that I think completely justified Seattle's selection of him. One play in particular against the Dolphins here that I think a lot of people may recall. But it wasn't the sack. It wasn't a tackle for loss. But it was a play where Skylar Thompson was running out to the right. It was Draymond Jones and Byron Murphy who were both in pursuit. Draymond Jones was on the outside and basically took kind of a beeline to the sideline, making sure that a terrific runner like Skylar Thompson wasn't going to be able to get upfield. It was Byron Murphy who was trailing from behind. And then I think that he realized that, hey, if I just go straight at the quarterback, then he is going to have to throw off of his back foot at best. It's that kind of instincts and the closing speed that a 300-pound man showed there that I think really is indicative of the type of explosiveness that the Seahawks were so excited about. So the statistics haven't been overwhelming to this point. I think that the odds that you might get if you were to maybe be, predicting that Byron Murphy II might be a Defensive Rookie of the Year candidate, you might get pretty good odds right now. But I think that he absolutely has been one of the biggest reasons why the Seahawks defensive line has been terrific. I read a statistic yesterday that the Seahawks defense is the very first since 1979, the great Steelers, to start off the season not only 3-0, but in limiting the opponent to 150 yards passing or less. Look, the secondary deserves a great deal of credit for that. Mike McDonald deserves a great deal of credit for that, and the entire defensive line. But Byron Murphy II, I think, also should get a great deal of that credit as well.
Yeah, I think he's looked really darn good out there. And the stats, look, Mike McDonald's talked about this a couple times. The stats are not always going to be sexy when you're talking about these defensive linemen, especially in a hybrid 3-4 system like this, where a lot of times these guys, they are creating opportunities for other players behind them with what they're doing in the trenches, not necessarily racking up a ton of plays, but this is the type of athlete that can still ward off double teams, can penetrate gaps, and create a lot of those big plays. So we saw some of them last week. You're hoping that this hamstring injury is not a significant one and that he's got a chance to be back in a week or two and maybe play on Monday night against the Lions. That would be the best case scenario, obviously, but at least before that injury, I've been pretty pleased with what I've seen from him so far. Our next question from another Corbin out there, Corb555 tweets, if you were John Schneider, how would you fix the offensive line? Well, look, it's week 4. I don't think that there's offensive linemen are not growing on trees. And if you look at what's available in the free agent market, there's really nothing out there that you can bring in right now that is going to instantly push your guard spots, for example, and be able to start. You're going to have to get guys coming in and you have to get them acclimated. There's really nobody out there, and the trade deadline is still a few weeks away. So at this point, it's too early. Teams are not going to be selling off offensive linemen right now. There's only a few teams in the league that haven't won a game. Maybe in a few weeks, you might be able to contact somebody like that and see if there's somebody they'd be willing to move. But if you're wanting to fix this offensive line right now, really the only move you can make is if you're going to put Christian Haynes in. And at this point, Mike McDonald sounded today like he is very interested in seeing what Christian Haynes can do. He's got to earn the snaps in practice this week, but it sounds like he's going to get his opportunity in Detroit. But I don't know what else you can do. Connor Williams is going to need more time to continue to get acclimated with a new team coming off an ACL. Going back, he played better in the All-22 than I thought he did in the actual game. So you're getting some progress there. I thought Stone Forsythe played pretty well yesterday. Cross, aside from one time getting beat, had a pretty darn good day again. He had a pancake on Charbonnet's first touchdown. So, look, the guard spots are right now the big issue. I just don't know that the Seahawks right now are going to be able to do anything other than internally. Can we put Christian Haynes in? Can we put McLennan Curtis in, who played some guard in the offseason? Those are the options they have right now. That's the best option they have. Trade deadline time, maybe they could make a move at that point, but it's too early in the season for that to happen. Our next question from Salva Truco 503. With a 3-0 start to the year, if we beat Detroit on Monday night, will the media finally view Seattle as a legitimate threat in the NFC? It does seem like they are hovering under the radar, but I think a lot of it's had to do with the quarterbacks that they have played against so far.
Yeah, 100% agree with you there. I think that the Seahawks are easy to pass up just because, as you said, the caliber of quarterbacks that Seattle has faced. That said, I think anybody paying attention can see the line of scrimmage that Seattle, albeit with the problems they've had at the guard position that you just referenced, the fact that Seattle has been as versatile on offense as they have, the fact that the defense has been able to create as many big plays as they have, I think that there are going to be some media members who are kind of waking up to the fact that the Seahawks are playing awfully good football right now, and there's no question about it. If they walk into Detroit and they pull off a victory against a very physical, obviously a playoff caliber club with the Detroit Lions, I think that you are going to get all kinds of attention. I think that Mike McDonald in particular is going to be getting all kinds of buzz. So if they are able to handle business this week, then I feel very, very confident that all the acclaim is going to be right around the corner.
And you wouldn't have to worry about the quarterback issue anymore because Jared Goff, legitimate top 10, maybe even top 5 quarterback when he's playing at his very best. And we are expecting a lot of points in this game, at least based on past precedents. But Mike McDonald might have something else to say about that going into this week in the Seahawks defense in general. BYL0711 tweets the defense was lights out on Sunday, but Miami only had 16 run plays and registered 32 passes. What is the reason Miami did not run the ball a bit more? Do you think the run defense is solid enough, even for teams with great backs such as Detroit? So that second part of the question here first, I would still say that there are a few concerns when you are playing against a team like Detroit that is going to play 2 backs. They're going to play multiple tight ends. Can the Seahawks handle that? That is where teams like New England had success. When they got 2 backs in the backfield, they were running 21 personnel, 22 personnel, and getting the ball downhill. And the Seahawks have had some issues with that. But at the same time, part of the reason I think Miami did not run the ball more is because after giving up a couple big runs on the first drive of the game, they couldn't get any yardage. I mean, Seattle completely shut down their run game and put them in a spot where they had to drop back and throw. Now, there were a couple of times they had a 3rd and 1 that Tyrell Dodson got a sack on a blitz that I don't understand why he didn't run there. But early in the game, they had the same situation, and Seattle stuffed them on 3rd and 1. So it seemed like in the short yardage situations, they couldn't get pushed, and the Seahawks were getting penetration throughout the entire game. So I think Mike McDaniel, his viewpoint was, look, hey, in these key situations, short yardage, Seattle's bringing their hard hats. We're just not getting the push. They were getting some nice runs on 1st and 2nd down, but really not a lot of splash plays. No, by the way, they averaged 3.6 yards per carry. It's not like they were running all over the Seahawks in this game. That never happened. Would I have tried to run the ball more if I was Mike McDaniel? Absolutely. But at the same time, they ended up in some really tough spots where they simply could not do it, and they were trying to find a way to move the ball and get to Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle, and ultimately it just didn't work out for them. Rob, last question here real quick from FTC Pedro tweets, if it comes to this in 2025, would you rather trade Geno Smith or DK Metcalf? And I know this is a question that a lot of Seahawks fans cringe, like, why do we have to get rid of either one? But these are hypotheticals that are worth discussing when you're looking at roster construction, especially with the Seahawks salary cap situation next year.
Yeah, that's the thing, is that if those are the 2 candidates that you are considering, then who are you going to get more value for? I still think it's going to be a younger DK Metcalf than even a incredibly poised and accurate Geno Smith. I read and kind of chuckled when I saw that Gino Smith said that he was, quote unquote, pissed off with how he performed against the Miami Dolphins. Obviously, anybody who saw the box score knows that they threw the 2 interceptions, but of course, both of those were tipped passes. I think that Gino Smith has played brilliantly all 3 games so far of this season. So I'm certainly in no mood to be pushing any trade Gino Smith kind of banter out there. But at the same time, again, I think that DK Metcalf is 1 in a million type of an athlete. I think that's also why you would get more for him. And so if you had to trade one of them, I think you always have to go with the non-quarterback. As much as I love DK Metcalf, as much as I think, again, that he is somebody you can build your entire offense around, I think the Seahawks are doing precisely that. I think that is the direction that you would have to go. I think it would just fetch more on the open market than a quarterback, even one that's playing as well as Geno Smith is, that he would receive in terms of what you would get back in compensation.
And I would say DK just because, look, we're talking about a guy, if he has the season looks like he's going to have, he's going to be wanting $30 million a year, which we've seen a few receivers fetching. Is John Schneider going to be willing to pay that price for a receiver when he's got Jackson Smith and Jigba on the roster? I know Tyler Lockett's getting older, but is he going to be willing to pay that price tag? He has been willing to pay receivers big bucks, but is he going to be willing to pay that kind of money? So if I had to go down this road, I would be like you. I think you're going to get more in return from Metcalf, and I think you also have to consider the salary thing. But I think a lot of Seahawks fans are hoping, hey, 2025, 2026, 2027 even, let's have both these guys. Let's make it work. And it's 2 very important positions in today's NFL. You got to have good receivers to go with your quarterback as well. When we come back, we are going to shift gears to Monday Musings, our takeaways after having a chance to watch the all-22 replays of yesterday's game. The Seahawks went over the Dolphins. We're going to talk offense, defense, and unfortunately, we got to get a little bit of special teams in as well. We'll get to that up next here on our Monday edition of Locked On Seahawks. This episode is brought your way by our friends over at DoorDash. Football is finally back, which means it's time to order your favorite game day food, snacks, and drinks on DoorDash without missing a play. When I'm enjoying football Sunday with friends and family, there's nothing better than kicking it back with a gluten-free Jet City pizza, cinnamon sticks, and of course a 2-liter root beer. Probably going to drink the whole thing during the game as we cheer on our favorite team to victory. DoorDash makes it so easy to order our favorites, and we don't even have to leave the comfort of our couch or miss a key play. Use the promo code LOCKEDFALL24 for 50% off up to a $10 value when you spend $15 or more on your first order. Limited time offer, terms apply. Promo is not valid for orders containing alcohol. DoorDash, your door to game day greatness, your door to more. Download the DoorDash app now to order your game day favorites. Must be 21 or older to order alcohol. Drink responsibly. Alcohol available only in select markets. Welcome back to the Monday edition of Locked On Seahawks. This is your host, Corbin Smith. Glad to be joined, as always, by my co-host in crime, Rob Rang. A special thanks to all the 12s who are listening in, and thank you, as always, for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. We greatly appreciate your support. The Seahawks moving to 3-0 for the first time since 2020 with a 24-3 victory over the Dolphins. It was such a weird game, Rob, because from one perspective, hey, you won by 21. That's a convincing victory in the NFL. And yet, as Gino Smith mentioned, it did feel like a lot of points were left on the field by the offense. Second and third quarter, pretty much non-existent in terms of getting to the end zone, missed field goal at one point. So there were a lot of missed opportunities. This was a game that felt like it should have probably been a 30-plus point rout. And it ended up being only 24-3. And there were certainly some reasons why the Seahawks were not able to fully maximize on that, but a win is a win, and this was still a convincing victory for the Seattle Seahawks.
Yeah, it was a terrific victory. I mean, I guess I never have really put much stock into blowout victories. I mean, sure, you want to blow teams out, but I also think that there is a level of respect there. I think that's one of the reasons, going back to one of the mailbag questions, that the Miami Dolphins didn't run the ball very much, is because they were down 17-3 after the first quarter. You know, they're completely behind the sticks, and, you know, their best players happen to be at the wide receiver position. So I think that they felt that they had no other option than except to try to pass their way back into the football game, and that kind of tied right into Seattle's hands as well. To me, one of my takeaways that I was initially and remain very, very impressed is how that Ryan Grubb has featured different players in different games. Of course, coming off the New England Patriots road victory and seeing the way that Seattle had hit both DK Metcalf and JSN for 10-plus catches, basically controlled the game. In this particular game, the way that they focused in the tight ends, if you would have asked people, I'm curious what the odds would have been, with Noah Fant leading the Seahawks in receptions based on the struggles that he had in week 2. For him to have, again, a team-high 6 receptions for Seattle's tight ends, Pharaoh Brown in his first game, at least regular season game for the Seahawks, the rookie A.J. Barner, them combining for 10 grabs in this particular football game. To me, what that does is that sets up the Seattle offense for the whole rest of the season. Oh, Detroit, you're playing really good football. This is going to be a road environment. Here's one more thing that you have to worry about rather than just the guys like DK Metcalf, JSN, Tyler Lockett, et cetera, et cetera. I love the way that Seattle shifted their focus in the passing game to the tight ends. It made them that much more versatile, that much more dangerous to defend.
Yeah, I hate to be the one that's got to continue to beat a dead horse and go down a negative road. But look, I mentioned the second and third quarter basically being non-existent offensively for the Seahawks. It felt like they had more second and 20 and third and 20 plays in those 2 quarters than they had all of last season. I mean, that's how bad it was. They kept getting behind the sticks with penalties, and there were some sacks thrown in there. Intentional grounding with Gino Smith trying to do more than he should have tried to do, but it's because the pressure's bearing down on him. Look, the dead horse here, it's the guard position. And I mentioned it in the mailbag, what the Seahawks can try to do. Christian Haynes, get him some snaps. McClellan Curtis maybe get an opportunity. I mean, right now, both of the starting guards should be on notice for the Seattle Seahawks. This is not a case now. We're deep enough into the season. 3 games is a big enough sample size that we know right now the Achilles heel of this offense is the 2 guard spots. Connor Williams, going back watching the tape, was he perfect yesterday? No, but I thought it was his best game he's had in his 3 games. He's going to keep getting better as he continues to progress coming back from that ACL tear. I thought both the tackles, aside from the one time that Cross got beat badly, he rebounded from that, though. He played great the rest of the game. He is having a fantastic third season. The issue is the guard spots. The Dolphins were able to get so much pressure. PFF had 11 pressures given up by the guards. I had 13, and there's subjectivity to that, but I'm going to count a pressure on the one that Calais Campbell swatted up in the air, and it ended up getting intercepted by the other defensive tackle, Zach Seiler. That play happened because Anthony Bradford got bullied back into the pocket, and then Campbell, wisely as a veteran, should at his stage of his career, gets those big paws up, knocks up in the air, and that leads to an interception. That is just, it was a killer pressure there. Bradford yesterday picked up his 6th and 7th penalty in 3 games. He can't stop getting penalized, and they're blatant ones. It's not like these are questionable calls. He is wrapping dudes up, holding. He's false starting. The unnecessary roughness that he had in week 2 that ended up destroying a drive. So many of these have been drive crippling penalties. Like there are different degrees of severity with penalties. His have been leaning on the, as Mike McDonald was saying today, those are not ones that blur the lines when you're a physical team and you're going to have some penalties. These have not been penalties that would qualify for that. And then Laken Tomlinson, he gave up 5 pressures in the first half yesterday. And I just feel like right now he's having a really hard time keeping defensive tackles in front of him. And he's a veteran. He has brought that to the table. And I think the run blocking has been hit. It's been hit and miss, but there's been some good plays for him. They ran to the left side a lot the last 2 weeks for that reason, but you're not seeing the consistency in pass protection that you want to see from a guy that's played as many snaps as what he has. I just feel like both these guards have got to be on notice right now with Christian Haynes and McClellan Curtis waiting. I mean, I was excited about Curtis more as a guard than a tackle. I wouldn't be against the idea of saying, look, you 2 guys have had your opportunities. We're going to see what we can get with 2 other guards here because they have got to figure out their best 5. Right now, it just doesn't feel like they have that with the guard spots.
I agree with you to a point. I definitely agree that clearly the guards have, been their true Achilles heel of this squad so far. I don't know that this on the road environment in Detroit on Monday Night Football is the game that you want to be making wholesale changes at the guard position. I definitely believe that Anthony Bradford has played so poor that is the position I would at least put him on notice. At least be kind of lean towards Christian Haynes getting some playing time, although not necessarily starting unless he proves it over the course of the week that he significantly outplays Anthony Bradford. Again, there's no question about the pass protection has been at times been horrific. It basically, the Seahawks have had to kind of start all over again, and being behind the sticks on 2nd and 20 or even more so because of the penalties, the pressures, whatever. But again, at the same time, I also believe that that's something that you can work through. I think that one thing schematically the Seahawks can do is they can just tighten up their splits. It's one of the concerns I had about Ryan Grubb's offense in acclimating to the NFL. There were not a lot of dominant interior defensive linemen in the Pac-12. There certainly were not a lot of dominant defensive linemen in the Mountain West, of course, for Ryan Grubb and Kalen DeBoer and everybody else, that former University of Washington staff when they were at Fresno State. There is going to be some welcome to the NFL moments for Seattle's coaches as well as these young offensive linemen. Anthony Bradford can still push people in the running game, but asking him to be kind of the dancing bear in pass protection just doesn't fit his game, and he needs to become better as far as just his recovery. He can get that initial jolt, but then he stops moving his feet completely, drops his head, he drops his hands, he gets his hands too far outside. He's a technical mess at times. And so, again, I think the only way he's going to improve is if you continue to play him some more. I do think that Christian Haynes can come in there and at least provide a very similar effect as Anthony Bradford at the right guard position. As much as I'm excited about McClendon Curtis, clearly the Seahawks love his versatility, and that is one of the feedback I've got from the club is that they like him more as a jack of all trades, master of none type. So I don't think that you're necessarily going to see McClendon Curtis out there. But again, I agree with your frustrations and Seahawks frustrations here. If something happens to Gino Smith or Ken Walker, Zach Charbonnet long term because of this shoddy guard play, then perhaps John Schneider is going to have to pick up the phone, albeit here in week 4, to try and get some type of reinforcements, because clearly this is the one bugaboo that the Seahawks have had so far, on offense, defense, or special teams.
Let's talk defense real quick. Obviously, this was the side of the ball that the Seahawks were dominant on yesterday. So obviously we want to talk about that side of the ball, but the guard situation is clearly one of the big storylines for this football team, even with the wins. I want to go from a positive standpoint here. The guard spot has continued to be an area of concern. It was an area of concern going into the season. Linebacker was the area of concern going into the season on defense. And look, I know it's just one game, and I know the Miami Dolphins had a second and third string quarterback in, so you got to take everything with a grain of salt. But I think we underestimated the talent the Seahawks have in that linebacker room. I thought Drake Thomas had a fantastic game yesterday, and I wasn't expecting to see him out there. But Mike McDonald threw him in, and in sub packages, he has a pass breakup, had a couple tackles. And look, how much I love Drake Thomas coming out of North Carolina State. We talked about it a lot on this show in the pre-draft process a couple years ago. I was a huge fan of him. I love his coverage ability. He racks up tackles. He can blitz him. He had a bunch of sacks there. He's a good football player, but he played really well yesterday. I thought Tyrese Knight made some really nice tackles at the line of scrimmage yesterday in his snaps. They're weaning him into that starting role with Jerome Baker being out, putting Drake Thomas, a more natural cover guy, at least at this point, in. I liked the way they were mixing and matching those guys. It just feels like maybe we underestimated here, and maybe it's just the Mike McDonald effect of what he is doing with those linebackers right now. They're playing really good football, and I thought they were excellent yesterday for the Seahawks. Tyrell Dodson had some big plays, the sack. I thought the linebackers might have been the best position group overall for the Seahawks yesterday.
They certainly were very impressive against the Miami Dolphins. And again, there's the Dolphins basically look like a fish out of water. Sorry, bad joke. But they look terrible at times. And, but at the same time, the physicality of Seattle's linebackers, the speed, how many times did you see, whether it be Tyrell Dodson, whether it be Drake Thomas, just the physical hits that Seattle's linebackers have, and then how many physical, really depleting type of hits did you see from the Dolphins linebackers, including a former Seattle linebacker? So I think that that's something that is a testament to John Schneider and his scouts. I think it also very much is a testament to Mike McDonald's system, but also very much the linebackers. I think that a lot of people did, myself included, did perhaps underrate Seattle's linebackers, although I was more encouraged by what I had seen on tape in their previous stops than maybe some had with, say, specifically Tyrell Dodson, and love Tyrese Knight coming out of college as well. Drake Thomas also, and Jerome Baker. I mean, talk about the depth. We talked about the depth along the defensive line, obviously with not having Jerome Baker on the field, and yet the Seahawks defense at the linebacker position was still just humming. To me, again, that's very encouraging. Real quick, one other player, to me, we can't talk about, breakout kind of positional groups, and especially linebackers, and not talk about the edge defender that basically is just becoming kind of like a fan favorite here. And then, of course, that's Derek Hall. I mean, Corbin, years ago, I made a buddy out there in Lofututupu when I kind of proclaimed that there was going to be an awful lot of fans out there wearing number 51 jerseys. Well, get in line to get yourself a Derek Hall jersey, because this guy looks like the real deal. Our friend Jim Nagy, of course, Senior Bowl executive, basically was predicting that he might be Seattle's sack leader at the end of the year. Jim Nagy may very well prove prophetic in that kind of a claim, because Derek Hall, the physicality that we saw in training camp in the preseason is continuing. You're seeing the greater dip and rip type of moves. It's all coming together for Derek Hall. I think the Seahawks have themselves a young superstar, and that was a position that I was concerned with, especially with Uchenna Nwosu coming off of the injury, and then obviously being sidelined here these last couple of games.
I'm going to wrap the show up with this. Look, this might have been viewed as a hot take 2 months ago. I don't think anybody that is watching the Seahawks right now, though, should bat an eye when I say this. Derek Hall is one of the top 3 athletes on this football team right now. Yep. He is a freak, and he's got the motor. We've always touted the motor. Like this guy, we saw him coming from behind on that sack at the end of the half yesterday, and how he was able to close in on a completely unsuspecting Skylar Thompson and just blast him. And the hand technique is better. He's been boxing this offseason. That's helped a lot. Mentally, though, I think that's where his game has grown the most. Last year, he admitted this yesterday that I thought I was smart. And then he came into the NFL and realized, oh, I can't just watch tape. I've got to study tape. And he's really learned how to do that. So he's picking up on tendencies with tackles, personnel groupings. And then you add in the improved physical stuff. And we already knew the athlete that he was. I feel like he's scratching the surface. That's a scary thing. I think there are still some plays that he can make that he's not made yet, and he's going to get there. But he started his first game yesterday. I don't think he's coming out of the starting lineup right now. I would even go as far when Uchenna Nwosu comes back. They might wean him back in as a reserve initially, because they don't have to force him back into the starting lineup. But an excellent start for Derek Hall, and he was clearly the best player on the field for either team yesterday. And I'm going to say it again. Top 3 athlete on the Seahawks team. I would probably put Ken Walker III there with him, and then Reek Woolen. Those to me would be the 3 most dynamic athletes on this team. There's some really good guys that are just off that list, but I would put Derek Hall right there. He is an absolute athletic specimen. As always, you can follow me on X and Threads at Corbin Smith NFL. You can follow Rob at Rob Morang. Make sure to subscribe to Locked On Seahawks on YouTube and wherever you get your podcast to make sure you don't miss a single episode. Coming up tomorrow, it's Tell the Truth Tuesday, and we might have a little bit of quarter of the season flavor to this with an extra day this week to prepare for the Monday night football game. We're going to be looking back at the last 3 games and, of course, one last look at Sunday's win over the Miami Dolphins. Make sure that you're listening in and enjoy the rest of your Monday. Go Hawks.